Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, wade through them, and pull out the key insights for you. It's all about getting well-informed without feeling, totally swamped.
Exactly. It's like finding the hidden threads, making those connections that really make the information click.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we're looking at a really popular book, The Courage to be Disliked, by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. It basically distills Adlerian psychology through this dialogue format.
Right. Between a philosopher and this young guy who's full of questions.
Yeah.
And Adler, well, he was a contemporary of Freud and Jung, but his take, as the book argues, offers some surprisingly straightforward answers about happiness.
And Adlerian psychology, it's had quite an impact, hasn't it? Especially in Europe and the US. The book even claims reading it could change your life, which is a pretty bold statement.
It is, and the structure really helps these conversations over several nights. The young man comes in pretty cynical, thinking the world's a mess and people can't really change.
Yeah, he sees this chaotic mass of contradictions.
But the philosopher just lays it out there. The world is simple, and life is simple too. He argues we're the ones making it complicated. And crucially, that people can change without exception.
That's a huge claim right there. So today we're going to dig into some of those core ideas. We'll touch on denying trauma, this idea that unhappiness is maybe a choice.
The importance of relationships and what courage really means in this context.
Okay, so let's start with that first big clash. The simplicity of the world.
Yeah, that opening line, the world is simple. The young man just can't accept it initially.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? But the philosopher's point isn't about, objective reality being simple. It's about our subjective experience, right?
Exactly. He says we live in subjective worlds and we give meaning to everything. So the world you experience is the one you've essentially constructed through your interpretations.
We're the meaning makers. That makes sense.
And that flows right into the next big debate. Can people change? Philosopher says absolutely yes. Young man says, based on his own suffering, no way.
And this is where Adler's own story is relevant. He broke from Freud, started individual psychology. It's a different focus.
Right. Less about past drives, more about conscious goals, social belonging, striving for significance. And the philosopher in the book connects this right back to Greek philosophy.
Which might explain the dialogue format, kind of Socratic.
Could be.
Yeah.
And it's interesting why Adler isn't a household name like Freud or Jung.
Yeah, the book actually tackles that. It suggests Adler thought his ideas were so fundamental they'd just become common sense, part of how we all understand things.
Like they'd be absorbed into the culture.
Exactly. And it points to people like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Stephen Covey, 7 Habits guy. Their work seems deeply influenced by Adler.
So maybe his ideas are more present than we realize, just not always attributed directly to him.
Okay, so let's get into something really counterintuitive now. This idea about trauma.
Right. The young man brings up a friend who's basically shut himself in, can't go out. And the young man's immediate explanation is, past trauma. Bad childhood, bullying, something like that. Etiology looking for the cause in the past.
That's how most of us think, isn't it? Look backward to explain the present.
It is. But the philosopher flips it. He introduces teleology, looking at the purpose or goal. He suggests, what if the friend's goal right now is actually not going out?
Wait, so the anxiety and fear, they aren't the cause of him staying in, but maybe the reason he creates to achieve the goal of staying in.
That's the Adlerian perspective presented here. It's a radical shift. The philosopher warns that focusing only on past causes traps us in determinism, this idea that the past dictates everything and we can't change.
So the past happened, but it doesn't have to lock us into a specific present or future.
Exactly. Adlerian psychology, according to the book, insists the past doesn't determine the present.
And the philosopher makes this even more pointed with that example about anger, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. He says, you did not fly into a rage and then start shouting. It is solely that you got angry so that you could shout.
Whoa, so anger becomes a tool, a means to an end, like making someone listen or back down.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Consciously or unconsciously. The point isn't to ignore past pain, but to say that dwelling only on causes keeps us stuck. It can lead to feeling powerless, like nothing can ever change.
Okay, so if the past doesn't determine us, how do we change? The young man wants to be like this cheerful guy, why? But immediately says, nah, I could never be like that.
And the philosopher's response is key. He says, basically, it's fine to be you, but it's not okay to be unhappy. Progress means taking steps. He completely rejects the idea that you're just born unhappy.
He says unhappiness is a choice. That's provocative.
It is. It's not about blaming people for their circumstances, but about recognizing the agency we have and how we respond and the meaning we give things.
This leads to the idea of lifestyle, right? Which isn't just about, like, your job and hobbies.
No, it's deeper. It's the fundamental way you view the world and yourself, the meanings you assign. And the kicker is, the philosopher says, we choose this lifestyle.
Choose it. How?
Well, take the example of the aspiring novelist. He says he wants to write, but his job is too demanding, so he never finishes anything.
Okay, sounds like a common excuse.
Right. But the philosopher suggests the real reason might be that by not finishing, he avoids potentially failing or facing criticism. He chooses to stay in the I could be great if only stage.
Protecting himself from potential disappointment by not actually putting himself out there.
Exactly. It's a choice to maintain that state of potential.
So the philosopher's challenge is pretty blunt then. If you want to change, you have to actively stop living your current lifestyle. Drop the if only.
Yes. That's seen as just an excuse to avoid the risk and effort of change.
This connects to why the young man says he dislikes himself. He lists all these flaws: pessimism, self-consciousness, distrust.
Yeah, whole laundry list. And you can't see any upside to feeling this way.
But then the philosopher suggests maybe, just maybe, disliking himself serves some kind of purpose for him. A virtue, he calls it, which sounds bizarre.
It does sound bizarre. But it's pushing us to think, are there hidden benefits to our negative self-views? What might we be getting out of them subconsciously?
Okay, how could that possibly work?
Well, he tells this story about a female student with a fear of blushing. She wants it cured so she can confess her feelings to someone.
Right. Seems like a reasonable goal.
But the philosopher interprets the blushing differently. He suggests maybe it's an excuse for her not to confess. Or maybe it's insurance if she gets rejected. She can blame the blushing, not herself or the situation.
So the symptom serves a function.
Exactly. And he says he wouldn't just cure the blushing because it allows her to kind of accept her dissatisfaction without tackling the real reasons she's not approaching the guy. Fixing the blush wouldn't fix the underlying fear or inaction.
Wow. Okay. That really reframes things. So sometimes we hang on to problems because they let us avoid bigger ones.
That's the idea being presented, which leads the young man to talk about his own huge blob of feelings of inferiority, triggered by seeing others succeed, feeling inadequate about his looks, education, job.
That feeling of comparison is so common.
It is. But Adler's view, again, is nuanced. He doesn't see inferiority feelings or even the pursuit of superiority as inherently bad. They're actually normal spurs to growth, if used constructively.
So feeling not good enough can be fuel, a launch pad?
Precisely. It only becomes a problem, an inferiority complex, when you use it as an excuse to give up. I'm not smart enough, so I won't even try.
Okay. And the philosopher also questions simple cause and effect here too, right? Like blaming lack of education for lack of success.
Yeah, he calls it apparent cause and effect. Like someone saying, my parents divorced, therefore I can't have a happy marriage.
Yeah.
It might feel true, but Adler would question if it's the definitive locked-in cause.
And the reframe is?
Instead of, I'm not educated, so I can't succeed, maybe the underlying thought is actually, I don't want to risk failure, so I'll use my education level as the reason not to try. It shifts focus from external limits to internal choices again.
That leads into the inferiority complex versus the superiority complex.
Right. The inferiority complex is using a perceived lack. A is the situation, like I'm short, as a reason not to act. So B cannot be done. So I can't be confident. It implies, if only A were different.
That if only again, but people can't stand feeling inferior forever, can they?
No. And that's where the superiority complex can come in. It's described as developing from those strong inferiority feelings, but without the courage to strive in healthy ways.
So it's like a defense mechanism.
Kind of. An easier way out, the book says. Instead of working to genuinely improve, someone might boast excessively, put others down, or act arrogant to mask their deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. It's overcompensation.
Okay, see the connection. But then the young man gets confused. If we're supposed to pursue superiority, isn't that about being better than others?
A very common confusion. But the philosopher clarifies Adler's meaning. It's about striving to be better than you were yesterday, moving forward on your own path.
Not about climbing over others.
Exactly. He uses this image of people walking on a flat plane. Some walk faster, some cover more ground, but they're all moving forward from their own starting point. They aren't in a race against each other.
So competition itself is the problem here.
Competition, in this view, fosters inferiority because you're constantly comparing. You start seeing others not as comrades on the journey, but as rival, as enemies even.
Okay, so wrapping up these initial ideas, a huge theme is the power of choice in shaping our reality, challenging that idea that the past rigidly defines us.
Yeah, and understanding our perceptions are subjective. We're the ones giving meaning. Plus this really challenging idea that unhappiness might be a kind of lifestyle we've adopted.
And even self-dislike could bizarrely be serving some hidden purpose, keeping us stuck perhaps.
Yeah, and shifting how we see inferiority not as a crushing weight, but potentially as that spark needed for growth.
So maybe a thought for you, the listener, to take away from this first part. Where in your life might a current frustration or a feeling of not being good enough actually be serving some kind of purpose for you? What's it allowing you to avoid?
And thinking about life less as a competition, more as your own unique journey. What's one small step, maybe a courageous one, you could take today to start moving forward in a slightly different way?